So I just wanted to acknowledge the amazing Gaylord banquet team for turning over this room. So we have three really good addresses this afternoon. And first, it's my pleasure to introduce Gary Shapiro, who is the president and the CEO of the Consumer Electronics Association. CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, of course, is perhaps the better-known brand, and it represents about 2,000 companies from around the world. It's really interesting to have CEA here. For those of you who are at the show in January last year, their show, you might have remarked that Life Technologies introduced the world's fastest DNA sequencer intended for desktops at the Consumer Electronics Show. Now, I tell you that 5 years ago, even I would not have predicted that. But the world is changing, and we are moving to getting the advantages of the consumer electronics industry where everything gets cheaper and better over time, and bringing that into healthcare. That's our fond wish. Gary is an author. He's had a very successful New York Times bestseller called The Comeback, How Innovation is Restoring the American Dream. That was a 2011 book, and he has another one coming out in January, Ninja Innovation, the 10 Killer Strategies of Our World's Most Successful Businesses. So he studies this area. He's represented it for decades. He believes that innovation supported by appropriate government policies can lead the U.S. to leadership and lead to a world of better products and change where it is necessary. He writes regularly for Forbes, for the Daily Caller, for the Huffington Post, for CEO Magazine, for Fox News. He's obviously bipartisan, as you can tell from all of those, and please give a warm welcome to Gary Shapiro.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rob, and thank you to HIMSS, and thanks to Rich Scarfo, who really created this event just a few years ago, and it's grown into something absolutely fabulous. You know, what people don't know is that Rich Scarfo, who's standing off stage, actually I met 30 years ago. And he worked at the Consumer Electronics Association for the CES. I'm in the same job, and Rich has gone on to do fabulous things and create this great event. I want to, when Rich called and asked if I would do this, I really jumped at the opportunity, because I think what is being done in this environment, in the intersection between technology and healthcare and delivery and trying to reach consumers, is absolutely critical. If you look at the headlines now and you turn on your television set, all we hear about is this physical cliff. Two things about that cliff. First of all, it has to do with, everyone talks about taxes. I'm not going to talk about that. It talks about expenses and taxes. Expenses, the biggest expense for government, the fastest growing expense is obviously healthcare. To the extent that innovation and technology can lower those costs, that is a really good thing. The other aspect we don't talk about when we talk about deficits in any developed country is there are three things at play. It's not only taxes and revenue and expenses, it's also about economic growth. Economic growth comes only from innovation. Innovation is difficult. Innovation is something which is always challenging the existing way of doing something. So if you're an innovator, you're challenging the status quo. Now, healthcare policy ties into this totally. Not only is it a great expense, it's a great opportunity. And the demographics, the aging population, the explosion in obesity and type 2 diabetes is very big. And obviously, we have the solutions here. We have the solutions with the software, the applications, with nanotechnology, with robotics, with remote care delivery, with biometrics and genetic mapping, with electronics and biometrics on a chip together, and so many different ways and new things that are happening very, very quickly. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do our institutions, can they keep up with this? The solutions that we're talking about require what I would call ninja innovation. Ninja innovation is, to me, is not only for companies and people, but it's also for governments and nonprofits and NGOs in terms of how you approach problems. And honestly, at our organization, which produces the largest innovation event in the world, the International CES, as you just heard from Rob, ninja innovation is something I talk about with my children as well as with our employees. And ninja innovation to me is if you face a problem of any type, you try to solve that problem in a creative way with the tools at your disposal. What's in your environment to do that? And you have to think outside the box. I know many of you are in management, if not most of you, and think about how your employees address something. If you're faced with a problem and you give it to them, do they come back to you and say they couldn't solve the problem? Or do they come back with a solution? Whose monkey do they put that back on? Do they put it back on your back, or do they solve it? And that's how you evaluate employees. That's how you get ahead in your career, and that's what you do, and that's what we have to do as a society. You have to break down that roadblock. And we have a few roadblocks we have to break down, frankly, in our society, having to do with what we're trying to accomplish with healthcare and delivery systems to consumers. We have a legal system which we have to confront. In the United States, we have about 1 million lawyers. And the lawyer's job is sometimes to expedite things along through the process, but more often than not, we're producing literally tens of thousands of people out of law school who are relatively unemployed, and any one of them can file a lawsuit and slow you down and sue you for something that they shouldn't. My view of the world is we have to go to a loser pays litigation system. We have to get rid of the patent trolls, which are affecting not only startups and big companies, but everyone with an idea is getting hurt by the fact that anyone can sue without any great recourse. And we have a healthcare system where doctors are incentivized not to try something new. It's better to do something safe and to old than to try a riskier treatment, a new way of delivering healthcare service. So we have to have a legal mindset that changes. And that goes to our regulatory system as well. The FDA in the United States has been fairly creative in trying to cut down some of the permission times and the approval times. And we've gone from a system where it takes up to 20 years to a system in some cases a few months or a few years. But in the technology world, we're in a totally different time scale. We're talking about months to respond to competition, to come out with something new or better. So we have a collision of cultures between a government regulatory world and a government approval world. And what we have to recognize, I think, as a society is levels of risk acceptance. Now, when you're talking about flying in an airplane, as many of you did to get here, you don't really want to have that much risk. You want to make sure that regulation is very, very rigorous. But when you're talking about something which can save time and money or cure a disease in a risky way or try something new, we have to evaluate the risk against the potential reward. Now, my wife is a surgeon. My in-laws are doctors. I go to a lot of medical conferences, and I hear a lot about medicine. And what I hear about is, at least it's structured in the United States today, it's not that favorable in terms of the regulatory system. The treatment evaluations do not consider, for example, the cost of various treatments. They don't consider the patient inconvenience. They don't consider how uncomfortable it is to get an injection or a drug. They don't consider the caretaker in having to get someone to get treated. They don't consider the cost of transportation, of gas, of the effect of the environment. They don't consider the benefits of remote treatment. They don't consider how the healthcare provider can be incentivized to deal remotely with a patient. Our healthcare system is based in a system that was before the internet, and we have to shift over. And honestly, I don't think it's getting better. Just on January 1, there's some new rules going in effect for reimbursements for healthcare providers, at least in my wife's area, where the doctors are reimbursed less if they do 2 procedures in the same office visit. So how are doctors going to respond? they're just going to spread out and have patients come for more office visits. It really doesn't make much sense in terms of how at least the United States reimbursement set up for doctors in terms of dealing with patients and technology. In some cases, innovation is not only not encouraged, it's discouraged. The new healthcare law, which is now the law in the United States, has a lot of good things about it. But what is in there? There's a tax on innovation. There's a tax as of January 1 on new equipment and newer devices that have to do with healthcare delivery. Now, the larger companies, they can afford to pay it. It's not a great idea. But if you're a startup and you're being taxed not on your profit, you're being taxed on your revenue, that is not a healthy thing. Doctors in the United States, for example, are incentivized to inject on the basis of the cost of a drug. They are reimbursed. They get a percentage of the drug. So there's two drugs which are the same for a form of macular degeneration. The National Eye Institute did a great thing. They compared the effectiveness of two drugs, Avastin and Lucentis. Avastin is about $35 an injection. Lucentis is $2,500 an injection. Doctors get reimbursed a percentage of the injections. What do you think doctors prescribe? The only reason a lot of doctors aren't prescribing the cheaper drug is because some of the patients can't even afford the 20% copay under Medicare for that drug. So we have an incentive system which is costing our government about $1 billion a year of doctors prescribing the most expensive drug. And even the most ethical doctors, and I've met them, said, I've had to go over. I'm losing $100,000 to $200,000 a year. Plus, we have an incentive system which allows Genentech, the drug producer in this case, to actually give secret rebates to doctors that use enough of the expensive Lucentis drug. And this was reported in the New York Times, and it was a subject of a hearing before the Select Committee on Aging. And the senators, bipartisan, stood there and said, I can't believe you do this. And it's legal. And you know what? That was a year ago, and it's still perfectly legal for doctors. And that's money being wasted out of the healthcare system. So a better healthcare system would encourage innovation, would focus on cost, would focus on motivations, and would get together the different players and stakeholders, and rather than have political solutions, have solutions that the different stakeholders could come up with and come together. We also have to change our culture a little bit. I'm going to ask you, how many of you have heard of Kim Kardashian? Raise your hand if you've heard of Kim Kardashian. I see a lot of hands going up. Well, that's great. What does she have to do with healthcare and technology and mHealth? Absolutely nothing. How many of you have heard of Joseph Murray? I do not see one hand in the room. There is the tragedy. Joseph Murray died a few weeks ago. He was 93 years old. In 1954, there were two identical twins, and one of them was about to die of end-stage kidney disease. He had an idea that he could take a healthy kidney from one twin and put it in the other, and he did it successfully. Indeed, Richard Herrick, who received that kidney, went on to live 8 more years. He married his nurse. He had 2 kids. And that established the principle of organ transplant, which forever changed many lives across the world. In 1962, Dr. Murray did the first organ transplant of non-twins, an unrelated person, and it succeeded. And now kidney transplants and other organ transplants are fairly common. In 1990, Dr. Murray won the Nobel Prize. And certainly the fact that in America today no one knows his name and his obituary was relegated to the very back pages with a short paragraph is we are honoring the Kim Kardashians of the world and we're not honoring the Joseph Murrays. And when you think about the future of our society and how we're going with healthcare regulation and who we make cultural heroes, are the best and the brightest going to be going into medicine in the future? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves, because it's tougher and tougher to be a doctor, and they are no longer the science and technologists are no longer the cultural heroes. I have to say the exception to that, in a sense, to the extent he was a scientist, is Steve Jobs. When he died, he was a cultural icon, and because he changed so many lives directly by what people were wearing and what they held, he was edified as a person to emulate. But there's very few of those out there now, and I think as a society we have to address that. We have to address that the way Congress did in the House of Representatives last Friday. The House of Representatives, almost all the Republicans and 35 Democrats, voted that for the United States, we're going to change our visa policy. So that instead of having random immigration and lottery winners from anyone in the world who wants to come here and happens to be the lucky one who gets selected, we would actually take the PhDs from the U.S. universities in science, technology, engineering, and math and let them stay in the United States. Sadly, the Obama administration now opposes this, and that legislation will die in the Senate. So basically, our White House, our government is on record now as saying we would rather have random immigrants than PhDs from Harvard. I spoke a couple of months ago about this before in Boston, and there was a lot of Harvard people in the audience. So many Harvard PhDs came up to me literally with tears in their eyes saying they want to stay in the United States, or they're running institutes at Harvard. They want to do, and they cannot get the best and the brightest anymore because of our immigration policies. I think we have to change our mindset and celebrate innovation and celebrate what we do. It should be our national strategy. In the United States, we have this phenomenal diverse culture. Diversity is our strength. We have a questioning society. Our school kids benefit from the fact that we're always being asked questions. We know how to innovate here. We have the best motion picture industry, biomedical industry, technology industry. We have so many things we're really, really good at, but so many things we have to change. Now, what we do as the Consumer Electronics Association, as you heard, we are a nonprofit. We have 2,000 technology companies as members, and we've really expanded into the area of healthcare. We own and produce the largest innovation event in the world, the International CES. It'll be held January 8th through 11th in Las Vegas. You're all invited. Please register. It'll attract about 150,000 people from around the world interested in innovation. It is not open to consumers. You must show that you have a business or academic reason to go. There'll be 3,000 exhibitors there. About 10% of them will be focused on healthcare and innovation. We have a whole healthcare portion of our show, which is up 25% over last year. We have healthcare tracks. We also have a demographic track aimed at the aging population, our Silver Summit. We have a whole portion of the show focused on fitness and healthcare technology, digital health. And it's not only about applications and biometrics and healthcare monitoring, it's how we gather this as a system. And some of the leaders in healthcare will be speaking, including Dr. Sanjay Gupta, as well as the CEO of Qualcomm, Paul Jacobs, and the CEO of Verizon, Lowell McAdams. And having met with Lowell last week, I'll tell you, they're going to be talking about healthcare big time, very important. So we invite you to that. We invite you to the Consumer Electronics Association. We're a membership, corporate membership organization. Anyone is welcome to join with a business interest. Our dues are fairly low. We actually have a booth as part of the exhibit hall. And we do a lot of research. One of the things that we're having a research session tomorrow morning at 7:30 where we unveil our research on what consumers want in healthcare and what they plan to buy. And let me tell you something, about 1/3 of Americans will buy a digital health product in the next year. And we'll be talking about the demographics, what they want, and how we're doing it. But I think what we have to do is we have to take the great knowledge that's inherent in the consumer electronics industry, which is mass market distribution at low cost, plugging into systems and retailers, and we have to marry ourselves with, frankly, the concerns of healthcare providers, of privacy, of security, and also integrate, somehow bring back the healthcare regulatory and legal structure, which is focused on some difficult regulatory hurdles, because we have an obligation and an opportunity as a society to solve some of these difficult problems for healthcare for people and also the financial problems that our nation and other nations face. What I wanted to do to make this more interesting for all of us, though, is turn this over to you to ask any questions. There's microphones there. But if there's one message I want to leave you with, is that as we approach healthcare holistically, we cannot let the perfect become the enemy of the really spectacular, great, and the good. And that's what, in some ways, we're going with healthcare, with our legal, regulatory, and political system. And we have an obligation, all of us, to try to change the system. So that's why I am speaking about these issues. And I'll give you another honest answer why I've written 2 books, why I write a weekly column. I've written 120 op-eds in the last year. Is that I'll make it personal for you. I am well past the age of membership eligibility for the AARP. And I'm married for the second time, and my wife and I didn't think we'd have any children. And I'm not allowed to give my wife's age, but she's younger than me, but not by double digits. Well, about 5 years ago, we found out she was pregnant, and what a miracle that was. We had a baby, and that got me thinking in a spectacular way that, my God, I'm not going to be around for a lot of this kid's life. You know, when you're a younger parent, you don't think about it. It's just the flow of life. When you're an older parent, you actually think about the future much more in different ways. So you realize you have an obligation to the next generation, especially if you're not going to be around for them. So I think what we do as a society and as individuals is very important. The other part of the story is, you would think I'm a very highly educated person. I know how babies are made. But we have another one now. I have a 7-month-old. And I know. Yes, finally, the audience is there. If there's anyone in a microphone, please, I really can't see you, but if you could introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello. My name is Dr. Nadine Levick, and I'm downstairs as one of the not-for-profit sort of public health approaches to utilising technology, social media, and as a resolution to our problems in public health. One of the challenges we've faced is how, as a social good, social media project, do we get funded when there's not a lot of commercial benefit other than the prime benefit of saving lives. Our project is called iRescue, and it's involved in using tools that exist currently, such as social media, to identify locations of cardiac defibrillators so that when an emergency happens, we know how to access the tools that are there. We have those pieces of the puzzle, but we don't have the systems engineering to put them all together. But that's what we're working on. But funding for a social good project, where the benefit is saving lives, not dollars, has its challenges.
I'm sorry, and where are you located?
Well, it's a global project. I'm Australian, but I'm based in New York City.
Okay. So thank you. Honestly, I didn't catch the total question because of the sound. But what I understand you're asking is you have a project focused, and the social media is an important aspect, but there's not a way of paying for that.
Correct. Well, a social good project. Correct.
Okay. Obviously, social media has fundamentally changed everything we do, and it's part of what we have to deal with. What I'm encouraged by is the fact that applications are coming very quickly, which are allowing people to link up in ways they never have before. And I think that that is a phenomenal opportunity, whether it's people voluntarily giving their information, and for genetic mapping encouraged by social media, or the Human Genome Project, or even part of the new healthcare law, which gathers information on a randomized, a privacy-deleted basis. But in terms of social media, what social media has allowed is people with common ailments to get together and solve problems. And I know in walking around the exhibit floor, I saw the social media being part of some solutions. So if you can make sure this is a question and keep it brief, I'll answer as many as possible. Yes, please identify yourself.
Hi, Gary. Neil Agate with mHealth. I will make it a question. I was thrilled to hear that you were speaking as from the consumer side, because I think that's what we need in healthcare, is more of a focus on consumer side. So I'm curious on what you've seen either here or in your other aspects of your work that combines the consumer, the great innovation with the consumer electronics with healthcare.
Thank you. The truth is, for consumers to do anything and deal with it, they have to use a device of some point. And the fastest growing product right now is tablets, obviously. And the second fastest is smartphones. And the penetration not only in the United States but elsewhere in the world is absolutely huge. It's just unprecedented in terms of penetration. And obviously both those products being wireless and relatively inexpensive and coming down in price allows great penetration virtually everywhere. But you do need, obviously, broadband connection, and that is increasingly an issue in terms of spectrum availability and handling the systems. In terms of consumers doing it, this is where I think we have to focus on the great being the enemy of the good. There is no wireless connection which is perfect. It does break down. We all know that. We've lost phone calls. And that is a... If you're relying on your systems being monitored wirelessly, you have systems breakdown. You also have, someone has to monitor that. Now, it could be done with a computer, but ultimately there'll be a doctor involved. Doctors aren't going to be sitting and monitoring things, and there's no compensation system which encourages that. There are some creative solutions I heard on the floor whereby basically patients are, maybe fully reimbursed and not even have a deductible if they are automatically monitored, if they're having their blood pressure taken, things like that. I think that's pretty exciting. Next question.
Thanks. I'm from DevX Impact. We're a website devoted to the intersection of business and international development. A question about your members. As they move into emerging markets, do you see them increasingly interested in global health issues reaching the bottom of the pyramid in a business-driven way? Thanks.
So the way I understand your question is that are technology companies going to be offering their wares to the public at large, even around the world, even those that don't have much money? And I think absolutely yes, because that is the cycle of innovation and technology. If you go back to even the most basic thing like plumbing or electricity or other things that people have taken advantage of, it starts out very expensive and the cost curve comes down dramatically and it goes on. I remember traveling around Vietnam a few years ago and seeing even in the least developed areas, people they didn't really have electricity, but what they did have is car batteries, and they were using those to charge their cell phones and get television reception. The fact is that technology comes down phenomenally in price over time and relatively quickly. Some companies like Nokia, for example, have made that a business strategy to go after the world. Other companies like Apple are a little more high-end, and they go after people who can afford more. There's, companies define their niche in their own strategy. But innovation and good ideas spread quickly, and obviously through social media, good ideas really spread quickly. What we benefit from, though, is phenomenally intense competition. Being a company in the consumer electronics space is absolutely brutal. Being a consumer is a wonderful thing. And, as I travel around the world and deal with my colleagues around the world, I am thrilled to see how technology has pervaded. And obviously, I know everyone here knows this, the wireless space has made it even easier. You need, it's much more cost effective, you need less infrastructure, and applications and services are developing quickly which allow things to be delivered in the most cost effective basis possible. There's a company which will be exhibiting featuring at the International CES in Las Vegas in January called HealthSpot. HealthSpot is a company which has created this little room. It's a private room, and you can put it anywhere in the world with internet service. And you walk in that room as a patient with a problem. You sit down, it weighs you, it takes your blood pressure and temperature and other vitals. Then you hit a touch screen, you put in what's wrong with you, your symptoms. And then based on all that information, it links you up with a doctor remotely. Live with a doctor, the doctor asks you some questions. The doctor can unlock certain features, certain other monitoring things which may be important depending on what your malady is. Then that doctor can do a diagnosis and can prescribe drugs. So if that health spot is in or near a pharmacy, it can go right to the pharmacy and get your drugs, and you can get an immediate form of health care. There's an example of a practical solution, and they offer a financial model where it makes sense for the pharmacy and the doctor, and very, very low cost for the patient. It does require an attendant to come in and disinfect after every patient, but it's really kind of a very clever way of taking technology and the fact that doctors' visits cost a lot, and you shouldn't have to physically go there, and solving a problem. The question is obviously is will our system, in terms of how things are paid for, catch up with these phenomenal innovative developments? And what I'm hoping for and encourage is a lot of experiments in that area. I think some of the states can do that, countries can do that, and that's the direction we should head. Yes?
David Wilcox, Reach Scale. There's 2 to 2.5 billion people in the world who don't have any access. And it's highly unlikely they'll get access with the current cost structures as attractive as they are in the global north. So I'm curious if your organization or organizations you work with are working on that problem. If you have a methodology for finding the innovators from the global south that you're going to need to partner with in order to solve the problem. And if you have some ideas about how underutilized resources from a variety of places like multilateral organizations and so on could be brought into play to dramatically lower the cost structure for getting access to the last 2 billion people, which probably means it has to be done without cell towers?
That's a good question. So what I talk about in my upcoming book, Ninja Innovation, is that obviously you have to set the goal. And you've defined a really good goal. Everyone in the world should have internet access. You know, with a healthcare law, I wish they'd sat down and said our goal is everyone, no one in the United States should ever lack for healthcare, and we have to cover everyone. How do we get there? Then asked everyone, and we would have come up with solutions. Your goal is a very ambitious goal, and I would agree with it. It's obviously going to take time, though, because, you know, internet access requires a number of things. It requires a certain form of electricity, even if it's remote or crank up batteries. It requires a distribution and infrastructure, which isn't as great as even electricity itself, having a wireline distribution structure. You know, I read recently that Facebook may have about 1 billion users soon. China has more internet users than the United States now. The numbers you're talking about, though, the growth rate is truly phenomenal. I think we will get to probably 90% of the world's internet penetration in the next 5 to 10 years. I'd be shocked if we didn't. What is the role of industry in that? When you talk to CEOs, as I often do, of major companies worldwide, there's no question that every one of them is interested in what they can do from a social good point and how they can get there. But it's a business opportunity as well as a social good, and they do that. The opportunity in the developing market is a great one. I've attended a number of United Nations events focusing on the issue you're talking about, is how do we get the world linked into technology? And as good as United Nations is, as good as development programs are, honestly, it's prices going down through intense competition, companies seeing opportunities for infrastructure. Some of the dangerous things that are going on, this week there's a conference going on in I believe it's in the Arab world, I think it's Dubai. It's the International Telecommunications Union is meeting. They're going the opposite direction. There is two proposals they're considering there. One proposal which would allow basically countries to deny their citizens access to any website outside the country. That is basically what they're trying to do, is recover the costs, that the revenue they used to get from wired telephone service. In other words, a long-distance call in developing countries used to make a lot of money. Now everyone uses Skype or the internet. Not everyone, because you pointed out some good statistics. But the revenue model has changed dramatically for these developing countries. So they want to basically charge their own citizens to have access to internet sites around the world. That is being considered by the ITU in the next week and a half as they meet. The other one is for countries to put a block around their country totally, for technical reasons, to block out the internet. That goes the totally opposite direction. I think the way to get 100% internet penetration in the world is to allow the internet as a quasi NGO private body working really well to continue on its path and bring down costs for everyone. And that includes the opportunity for companies to go in and provide development. That's working in other areas such as purifying water, sanitation. Other areas are getting to countries, but you got to have the countries themselves on board. And what we often find in some developed countries is you have rulers with non-transparent systems offering exclusive monopolies to companies with relatives of their own, enriching the ruling body without any transparency as to how these monopolies are given, because often telecommunications is a monopoly. Our strategy in the United States for broadband distribution has been very clear, and that is that you focus on competition between providers. So 15 years ago I was giving speeches and talking about we need competition in broadband between cable and broadcast and even power line and over the air. Now we've gotten that. We got to go the next step is we have to have competition in wireless delivery of internet. Once you get competition, prices come down. And I know maybe I sound like I'm too free market economics, but it worked. It's working in the U.S. and it's working elsewhere. And the statistics you could point out and say, well, Korea's better, some other countries are better. You have to look at the demographics of a country. You have to look at the physical structure of a country. Even in the United States, most of the United States does not have, in terms of physical miles, physical footprint of the United States, does not have wireless internet service. Because there's vast portions of the country that are uninhabited, and it doesn't make sense unless you're getting it by satellite. So the answer is to encourage competition, to remove barriers, and to be creative. And I see my time has totally expired, and I apologize to the producers here. Thank you very much. I'll be available afterwards, and thanks for being part of this event.